This is the first of probably several videos covering the work of George Chappell, or you might pronounce his last name Chappell. I know the founder of Tom's of Maine toothpaste spells his name the same way and he pronounces it Chappell, but during all the video clips you'll see I have been pronouncing his name Chappell. It just looked that way to me. So there's different ways to pronounce certain names. I always think of the town Carmel, California, but I also lived in Carmel, New York, which I felt like I should pronounce it Carmel, like the one in California. But we'll just go with Chappell, and hopefully no one will take too much offense. So George Poole Chappell was born in 1857, lived till he was in his mid-70s, till 1933. From what I've read, he was from Brooklyn, and he died in Brooklyn, and he's buried in Greenwood Cemetery. And he is another architect like Montrose Morris who designed a house for him and his wife to live in, but his first wife passed away when she was young, and they didn't live in the house that he designed for her on St. Mark's Avenue in Crown Heights. He remarried and he wound up living down the street in an apartment building, so you could always walk by the house that he once lived in and that he designed. Not sure why that happened, but that's where he lived on St. Mark's Avenue. And there's another George Chappell or Chappell out there who went to Yale and he became an architectural critic, but he was born 20 years after Brooklyn's George Chappell. So I have a picture of one of his buildings. He tended to design mostly houses, and there aren't usually historic postcards of houses, row houses. So this is regarded as one of his best works at St. Bartholomew's Church. It's in Crown Heights. It's not a huge church, but it's attractive, and I don't know how well used it is today, but it still stands, and we'll take a look at it, as well as his extensive catalog of residential houses and some factory and warehouse type buildings. This is it, 165 through 171 New York Avenue. George Chappell. 4 houses. The 2 middle ones have stoops. 2 on each end, 1 on each end no longer has its stoop. 1882 these brownstones were built on New York Avenue in Crown Heights. George Chappell. Here's 2 by George Chappell at 76 and 78 Halsey Street. 76 has its stoop, and 78 probably once had a stoop. And they were built in 1883, and they were the first Romanesque revival houses in the area, and they're right one house away from Montrose Morris's Alhambra apartments right here on Nostrand Avenue. So that's one of my favorite apartment buildings, and Halsey is definitely one of my favorite streets. Look at all these beautiful homes here in the heart of Bed-Stuy. So 76, 78 Halsey, George Chappell, 1883, Romanesque Revival. This is my last house that I'm filming by George Chappell that I know of. It's at 194 Hancock in Bed-Stuy, built in 1886, 87, and it's beautiful. It just stands out. It's a lot different from the other brownstones, brick stones you see on the street. Not to take anything away from them, they're all great looking. This is just looking up and down Hancock Street, which is just a premier street in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and in New York. So So George Chappell, nice job. 194 Hancock in Bed-Stuy, 1886 to 87. Here's 4 by George Chappell, 1 to 7, Arlington Place, built in 1887, right at the corner of Arlington and Halsey Streets in Bed-Stuy. George Chappell designed these 5 houses, 271 to 279 Jefferson Avenue. Just inside of Marcy Avenue. And it's another area where all the houses in the neighborhood are to die for. Let me just double check the date. 1887 these gems were built. George Chappell. Jefferson Avenue and Marcy Avenue in Bed-Stuy. This is the back of Girls High School on Nostrand Avenue. James Naughton, first high school built in Brooklyn behind the scaffolding. And then here's on Macon Street, 1887 George Chappell, 60 Macon, this house on the corner. And it has an Oriole bay window on the side. And I don't know if there was always not a house here in the middle, but maybe it's a yard that the 2 houses split. This other house over here at 68 is a charmer. I don't have who designed that, but like so many blocks in Bed-Stuy, it's all interesting. So 60 Macon Street, George Chappell, 1887. I had admired this tall, thin building right next to Montrose Morris's Imperial Apartments at Pacific and Bedford here in Crown Heights. And I found out that this is a George Chappell designed building. And it's now a funeral home, at least on the lower floors. And I don't have a date for it, so it's late 1880s, early 1900s on Bedford Avenue between Pacific and Dean Streets in Crown Heights. George Chappell, 1979, Park Place in Crown Heights. This house, by the way, at 32 Prospect Park West, the former Frank Squire house, built in 1888, had a twin house next door to it, but it was gobbled up by this nondescript high-rise apartment building. So that's why it's all by its lonesome here. George Chappell designed this Episcopal church, St. Bartholomew's, on Dean Street, just east of Bedford Avenue. And I don't have a date on it, so it's going to have to be late 1880s, early 1890s. It's built in the arts and crafts style, and it's supposedly George Chappell's best church. And so it's right across the street from the Bedfordshire and the Imperial apartment buildings by Montrose Morris, which are at 1200 Dean Street. George Chappell, St. Bartholomew's Church on Dean in Crown Heights.
just noticed that this building, which is part of the St. Bartholomew's church complex, may be a former school, but it is totally dilapidated with the holes in the roof. But a nice old building that could be renovated here on Dean Street in Crown Heights. We'll start out here at Dean and Nostrand and looking down east down Dean Street. Beautiful homes. We're going to look at two sets of houses designed by George Chappell on Dean Street. And the first set starts with this, how do you describe it? Well, let's just say it's a stepped roof, and there'll be another one at the other end of the row, and this is at 1164 through 1182 Dean Street. And like with all the George Chappell homes, I do not have the dates, so we just have to always go with late 1880s through the 1890s. And so there's a little repetition for three houses, and it breaks, and these two in the middle are their own design, and then you go back to another three of the same as the eastern three. And then his house at the end at 1164 with the stepped roof line again. Really tough to stand out on this street though. A lot of really beautiful homes. This is on Dean between Bedford and Nostrand. And when I was initially checking out this block, this apartment building set of, or it's now apartments, maybe they were individual homes side by side. It really is impressive. Kind of a Beaux-Arts design, as is this. Beautiful. So the other set of homes is up here on the right, on the north side of the street. And this was just really eye-catching too. This kind of reminds me of the Glesner House in Chicago by H.H. Richardson. It's that sort of style. Really impressive. And let's see. This house is on this side at 1141 through 47. So that would be right here from the dark red over here to the orange, which is probably like the original color. And I'm sure the middle house probably had it looks like it had an extra story added on top, but it would have looked like the second one from the left at 1143. So this just shows you the amount of beautiful homes in Crown Heights on Dean Street as we walk towards Bedford Avenue. We start off by looking at one architect, and then everything is impressive. Now this is another set of homes. I don't know who designed it. Could have been one of our 17 to 20 Brooklyn School architects, but it's fantastic. And we're at the end of the street. And this is the former Lincoln Club, 1889. Then it was called the Unity Club. This is by P.J. Lauritzen. We've looked at it separately. And there's General Grant on his horse here in Grant Square.